Hello, lovely humans. Lisa here from Mindful Tarot, and I was about to say I'm writing today. I'm vlogging today with a very belated response to Kelly Bear's um, video challenge, her question about the 5 tarot decks that we couldn't live without, or the other way that she interpreted it, which I think was really powerful. The idea of the 5 decks that if we were on a desert island or if we were traveling for a year and we could only take 5 with us, what would those decks be? That second form of the question, not necessarily our 5 can't live without 5 favorite decks, but instead the 5 we would take with us. I think that form of the question was really interesting for and juicy for a lot of people because it helps us get into the question of what am I chewing on right now? What am I really working with right now with the tarot? What would I want to dive deep into at this point in my practice? And I was really inspired by Kelly Fitzgerald. In fact, right now, is there something about the name Kelly? You know, Kelly Bear, Kelly Fitzgerald, Kelly Ann Maddox. I mean, they're wonderful, wonderful teachers out there. I've been loving so many of your videos. Avalon, you know, you break my heart. Quilafane, I love your videos too. But why are there so many Kellys? Since my favorite color is green, that may have something to do with it. Kelly green. Okay, I'm digressing. So Kelly Fitzgerald, um, just really loved the way that when you answered Kelly Bear's challenge, you tilted the question toward um, thinking about really what you wanted to investigate now, and you started to talk about your interest in the Marseille Tarot, and then how your work with your brand new Marseille deck has just really brought you to a kind of really interesting place. That with the Pursuit, with the Thoth deck, and this uh, sort of more stripped down relationship to the Pips. That has gotten me thinking. It's got me thinking about a question that I'm just going to like touch on today because I don't know that I understand what is interesting to me right now just completely, but I'll just throw it out there, and that's this relationship between image, archetype, sort of the visual, but then also the symbology of a card in this very static, two-dimensional way, right? This sort of it's a snapshot of reality. Um, it's a mandala, to use sort of an Asian Buddhist or Hindu kind of concept. It's a static representation of reality, right? The way that that kind of two-dimensional static snapshot moment of reality, the way that that connected up in sequence, right, through the power of number, right, sequence, our ability to count and put one thing after another, right? How that, first of all, creates narrative. So we want to talk about the ways in which the Fool's journey unfolds over the course of 22 cards. Or we might want to look at a suit, right, of what happens from the ace through to the 10 of a particular suit, or even including all the court cards. So is there a kind of movement? The minute you have that static image in sequence, you get narrative. And narrative gives you another way to understand um, archetypal human experience, not just in terms of a snapshot of reality, but a linear progression. Um, so, you know, this is human myth making, human religion, spiritual systems, they're always built up of these archetypal static snapshots, then also these kinds of sequences. And it's that mix between what number allows us by giving structure and sequence, and what archetype in this static way provides us. It's that interplay between the sort of two-dimensional and the three-dimensional movement through time. It's that interlacing that makes tarot such a rich system, so that any given artist can play around not just with the imagery of a particular card, but with the way that imagery maps onto sequence. Um, So this is, I don't know if this, I'm hoping this kind of makes sense. Eager to hear what you think. Um, but it's what allows for the endless elaboration and proliferation of new decks as systems of meaning that are both archetypes and then sequential structures get mapped together. So you get this deck, that deck, and so forth. Um, so I want to investigate that because my inclination, my intuition with the work I've done so far is that when we work across decks, we dive deep into a specific system and then we bring in another system. That doesn't just help us understand the meaning of a particular card. So if I look at, you know, the Fool in uh, the Paulina deck and I compare it to the Fool in the Buddha Tarot, totally different system. I'll say more about that in a minute. To, I don't know if these are in order. This is my little mini deck of the Centennial. Yeah, here we go. To Coleman Smith's Fool. To on and on and on. That comparison, that translation from one deck to the next does give us this deepening appreciation, maybe, of the Fool as something that lies outside of any given deck, that's somewhere up in the realm of intuition or down in the realm of intuition, somewhere separate from what any given human system has captured. So that's really cool. But then also in that movement from one deck to the next, as we dive deep into a different, in this deck and compare it to another deck and try to understand what each card in its kind of abstract, perfect meaning means for us, as well as encountering the specificity of any given deck. As we do that process of translation and comparison and working with a whole bunch of decks, we're also seeming to encounter something that is bigger than tarot. And that's really cool. And something that underlies the ways in which humans uniquely encounter form and substance, the sort of truths that get captured through number. And we start to, and through image, and we start to, I think, begin to understand why numbers have been, a sacred part of human thought for thousands of years. Numbers which have no imagery attached to them, but simply are about the ways that humans map existence through time. Okay. Did that make sense? Was that just vomiting on the screen? I don't know. Okay. So what would my 5 decks be? Just quickly now. I mean, I've been working a lot with the Universal Rider-Waite, which I bought without having ever seen it in person, having just looked at a bunch of videos and thinking, I have a small version of the Coleman Smith, the Centennial, and I have the original, and I wanted a kind of basic deck. And when I first got it, I didn't really love it. It's very plasticky. I thought I would really like it. I thought from seeing it on computer, I thought, that's nice and simple on the back, and the coloration is, it's nice. It's a little bit more. The colors are a little bit more nuanced than the original, than the Rider-Waite. It doesn't have the problems of the original Rider-Waite that have all that sepia tone and the kind of weird stuff that happens with the greens in that deck. And I thought I would like it, and then I hated it because it was so plasticky. And now I actually really love it. So I just find it a kind of my basic kind of anchor point for, okay, here's the granddaddy of them all. Here's where it started. So this would be one of the decks to just, anchor me in the Rider-Waite system as I think about this issue of how things get translated from one version to the next. I'd also then want to have a sort of more modern version, and I've just been starting to work with the Paulina, and the sort of complexity of the images, the um, sort of idiosyncratic, but really deep and juicy complexity. I'm just randomly pulling cards here. The palette is really muted and a little bit monotonous, but I'm kind of blown away by the line work. And the deck, unlike the plastic nature of the universal, the universal, this cardstock is really sexy, as they say. It's really dreamy cardstock. I don't like the backs, though. The backs are totally blah. But those aesthetic aside, just as a kind of, okay, here's a Rider-Waite version that stays true to the imagery, seems to have quite a bit of depth in it, gets a lot of the ambivalences, sort of offers a really heartfelt version of the traditional imagery. So this would be the second deck. So I'd have my kind of, standard Rider-Waite, a modern day version of that, and then I guess I only have 4 decks here, and then something that is a kind of much more drastic revision of it. So here I'd go for the Tarot of the She, which has really been blowing me away. This deck just does something, as a bunch of people have been saying. It just, the primitivism of the imagery, the palette, the complexity of wow, just look at that. Okay, so the Dreamer Queen, so the Queen of Swords, sitting on a stack of books. What? Yeah. Just the power of the imagery. So you get some of the pathos of the Queen of Swords. If you want to interpret her in sadness, there's a kind of grief that is carried in her posture. But the ways in which her sitting on a world of reason, literally with sitting on these books, she's holding some kind of animal in her hand. I don't know what or why. Almost as if that kind of ability to empathize with her surroundings is being held at bay. There's a lack of full ease with her world, but that powerful rising or setting sun behind her that suggests a kind of movement toward fulfillment that's also partially thwarted. It just, what the heck? And then, Emily Carding's interpretation of the cards. So her reading of the Dreamer Queen: her throne is knowledge, true and just. Her mind is all that she will trust. A blade as sharp as any sword, and solitude is her reward. Right? This power of mind that is forcing her to hold the world at bay and is the source of her sadness. This is a card that, I, in my intellectual moments of sorrow and isolation, can relate to. Anyway, the Tarot of the She, I feel like there's something very powerful going on in this deck, for sure. So, 3 Rider-Waite related decks. And then the Buddha Tarot, which takes the Rider-Waite structure, 22 trumps, 4 suits, and overlays it with a completely different system, a Buddhist, and it's a very specific system within Buddhism. So, you know, the Fool's Journey is the journey of Siddhartha coming into his awakening. And, you know, that does interesting things. You overlay one system with another system, you get these correspondences that tell you a lot about both systems. So here's the Wheel of Life, which maps into very precise ways of interpreting the Buddhist doctrine of reincarnation, which also uses the image of a wheel or a circle to be expressed in very traditional ways. And then the 4 suits relate with specifically Buddhist imagery. The devil is tied to Mara. Now Mara he is kind of a devil figure, but it's a really different kind of devil. Mara tempts Siddhartha as he's meditating and on his way to enlightenment, but this temptation isn't so much the way we think about the devil's temptation. Mara isn't necessarily evil, really. Mara is just the principle of a pragmatic world where, you know, things are bought and sold, and you get along, you get ahead, you vanquish your enemies. I mean, he's just the figure of a world of suffering. So it's a different kind of devil figure, but it's a devil figure. So it tells us something about the devil in a traditional deck. It tells us something about the Buddhist deck, and it helps us see the ways in which this structuring of story, of archetype, how in and of itself that might have a kind of depth or meaning to it. So I'd want to study the Buddha Tarot, which I haven't even worked with at all. I haven't even read the book. It's one of my projects. It would be the project I would take with me as part of my work for this year with my 5 decks. Okay, moving along, because things are... So, and then I have my version of the Tarot of Marseille, which is the Jodorowsky and Camus, I don't know. This I bought on the internets, and it's a beautiful kind of, it's just sort of modern, it's a vintage Marseille deck that has been sort of cleaned up and recolored, and it's beautiful. So here's the Wheel of Fortune. I love this deck, and it's also beautiful cardstock. Oh, it just feels glorious. And here, I mean, this is like what Kelly Fitzgerald is doing now in her explorations of the Marseille, trying to understand how the world of the pips, which is just about number and sequence, what does that mean? How does that work? And as you explore that, and Kelly's been going into kind of really interesting ways of talking about numerology, but there's also a way in which, these pips and the different kinds of core symbols express pattern and shape. So, so just thinking about how number is also shape, the difference between the wands, the bâtons, which are completely linear, the cups, which have are circular but have the ability to hold and contain, and then the swords, making a mess here, the swords, which are curved, my computer's doing funky things, so hold on, okay, that are curved, right? They're that kind of more Persian, like a scimitar, and then the discs, the coins, which are round like the cups, the chalices, but are flat, right? So how does shape and number sequence, how do those two structuring principles create meaning? So working with the Marseille, right, alongside the 3 Rider-Waite versions, and then this weird, complete sort of allegorical translation of tarot onto a completely different system of meaning with the Buddha tarot. What I'd be exploring in my with my 5 decks over that year is really what is the relationship between image and sequence, and how do the powerful sets of meanings that we encounter when we work across decks, how do those help us tap in not only into our deep intuition, but into something that goes beyond human intuition? What are we tapping into? That would be my exploration. Okay, I hope that made sense. Sometimes I feel I'm talking to you guys, and I'm wondering if I'm talking, if anyone's out there. Hello, and eager to eager to see how my thoughts land. Really enjoying my ability to chat with you guys, and wishing you all well. And thank you very much for your practice.